Hey, how's it going, everybody? Scott Spreitzer here. He's Scott Rickenbach. We're DocSports.com's Scott and Scott. College football, NFL, early moves that came across on Sunday afternoon for next week's games. And, of course, we'll have best bets at the end of the show. And we're going to cover what? We've got a handful of college and a handful of NFL. And, again, those are coming up in just a bit. And basically, if you're new to this, is what we're doing is we're looking at those sharp moves that took place at the major books on the Sunday afternoon college football and NFL as they get ready for next week. And there's been some significant moves. I'll say real quickly, folks, these moves, if you simply tailed the sharp moves that we've been talking about since we started doing this show, 27-20 with a couple of pushes against the spread. That's 57% ATS. And just betting to win $1,000, you'd be up exactly $5,000 right now. So doesn't always go that way when you're looking at those early moves, but they have so far. After I think it went 8-5-1 this past week. So we'll look to see if those sharp moves keep winning or not. Also, before we jump into the games real quick, you can get 20% off any daily, weekly, or monthly or season packages from Scott Rickenbach or from me. Simply go to our handicappers' individual homepages over at DocSports.com. It just excludes the daily top football picks, which are above the grid. But you use the code word Scott and Scott when you purchase the package. And it's good all the way through Monday, October 27th. So you got a whole week plus of being able to get this if you wish and take advantage. Again, 20% off. You see it there. Scott and Scott is the code word. Let's get to it, Mr. Rickenbach. Get some Friday night ACC action. I still have a hard time saying ACC when I'm talking about Cal and Stanford. But Cal hung on for a win. Unfortunately, a non-cover. The other night, I had a comp play on Cal against North Carolina. Now they got to travel across the country. And Scott, this one opened 2.5. It's as high as 5. Most books have 4.5, but as high as 5 in a couple of major shops. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, Cal ended up struggling versus a bad North Carolina team that's been a disaster under Belichick, and they could have really lost that game outright were it not for a late game fumble by the Tar Heels. So, and they barely got by a Boston College team that's now 1-6 on the season. So the point is that Cal could easily right now be on a 4-game losing streak instead of 2-2 the last 4. And remember, the 2 losses in that stretch were by a combined 79-21. So here you have a situation where Virginia Tech's off a bye week. And before the bye, they lost back-to-back games to teams that are now a combined 11-2 on the season. So no shame in those losses, really. And I think the Hokies at home and with the rest edge, they do look like the right side here. And like you said, Cal going all the way across the country for this one. It's funny when, being in the ACC, again, it just doesn't make sense, especially to us old school guys, how they've restructured some of this stuff. So, yeah, I like the move here.
I like their young quarterback, but does make young mistakes for Cal.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Again, I mean, when this opened 2.5, I was like, wow, that looks like I think we're going to be talking about that on Sunday night is kind of what I was saying to myself, Scott, and here we are.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Let's move to Saturday's games. We're going to stay in the ACC. We got NC State at Pitt. I like the young quarterback for Pitt, this kid. I mean, I think he's going to be a good one. They've won a few games now, but the sharp early money came in on NC State, folks. You can see right there the Wolfpack went from an 8.5 opening line dog. They are now a 7-point dog. That Pitt quarterback, by the way, is named Mason Heinchel, and he looks like an up-and-comer. I agree with the move here, though, Scott. I think NC State, boy, that opening line was a little bit too high.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, and this is another one where we're talking about a team off of a loss and off of a bye week. So they got destroyed at Notre Dame prior to the bye week. So they should hit the reset button coming into this one. And I know the Panthers, they're off of 3 straight wins, including back-to-back road wins and a blowout win at Syracuse. But that win was fueled by 3 turnovers for the Orange. And also the win over Florida State the week before for Pittsburgh. It looks a little less impressive now that the Seminoles have lost 4 straight games. And the Sharps are looking at the fact that Pitt is a little overvalued here. Like you said, Scott, this is a pretty big number, and the underdog is worth a look. NC State did win, if you're concerned about, they're on the road here, but they did win at Wake Forest. And in that 12-point loss at Duke, they did outgain the Blue Devils. So I think there's some nice value here with NC State as a big dog.
Next up, we got Mississippi State at Oklahoma, a little bit of SEC action. And the Sooners opened 3, Scott. They're now up to 4.5. They were hit early, just like they were last week. They were hit early, and the early move was proved to be correct as they were able to get that big road win over South Carolina and, looked pretty good coming off the Texas loss. They didn't lose to Texas twice, put it that way. It could be tough pulling the trigger on the Sooners, Scott. They got that so-so offense, but Venables' defenses, man, they're always ready to go.
Yeah, and they're now 6-1 on the season, and their only loss was that game with Texas, which was fueled by a 75-yard punt return touchdown and a 3-0 turnover deficit for OU. So I think the Sharps are looking at this as a short number to back an OU team whose 6 wins have all been by 7 or more points. So pretty low number here. And Ole Miss off a huge game at Georgia, and it was a loss in which they allowed 17 unanswered in the fourth quarter. Plus, they were heavily outgained. So not only could they suffer the unbeaten letdown here, the Rebels also have benefited from a home-heavy schedule. They had played 4 straight at home before that game at Georgia. So I do like the move here. I like the Sooners in this one.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention real quickly, I put Mississippi State there, a leftover from a couple of weeks ago, I think, on the caption. But as Scott says, it's the Ole Miss Rebels who are in Oklahoma. And so, folks, ignore that Miss State. I don't need 20 reminders tomorrow about how in the world could you put Miss State? It is Ole Miss. We do know that. Take it on Oklahoma. Also, I wanted to talk about this one, Scott, in the Big 12. BYU is at Iowa State. Iowa State opened 1. They are now a 3-point favorite in a lot of books in this one. A couple of 2.5s out there. I thought this number was a little low when it opened too. BYU with the big win in the Beehive State and the Holy War battle at home against Utah. Iowa State's a funny team, and they have been under this coaching staff, or at least this head coach, Matt Campbell, Scott, because it seems like when the Cyclones get to a place where you expect them to do well and win football games, and by do well, I mean, maybe win 10, maybe win 11, maybe a playoff berth. And we saw this a few years ago with them too. As soon as they start getting a lot of notice is when they tend to lose a game. And we've seen them lose a couple now. And I'm sorry, there's no excuse to lose at Colorado. Too much talent on this Iowa State team. And, listen, I like Dion. I really do. What an unbelievable player. But we've seen him have a hard time throughout games as far as a X's and O's game coach and making adjustments. And yet Iowa State couldn't figure out a way to beat Colorado. I know it was on the road. But now they're back home. They're kind of not, the expectations aren't as great as they were a few weeks ago. They might be catching BYU at the right time, and here they are. They're a sharp move from 1 to 3 in a couple of major books.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Scott, and it's an interesting line move considering that BYU 7-0 on the season and Iowa State now off those back-to-back losses after the 5-0 start. Like you said, this is classic for the Cyclones to do this, but this is another case where a team is off a bye week and looking to respond following a loss. And as you touched on, off the Holy War victory, that's such an important game for them. And they were actually outgained by over 100 yards in that one and benefited from a 2-0 turnover edge. So keep that in mind. And last season, after they beat Utah, they were 9-0 on the season. And then the next week they were at home versus Kansas and they scored just 13 points and lost. And so this is another flat spot for them here. And they're going to face a highly motivated team off back-to-back road losses that's going to be ready to respond at home. And by the way, Iowa State in those back-to-back losses, they did hold the aggregate yardage edge in those 2 games. And one of them was to a Cincy team that is now 6-1 on the season. So this is a good spot for the Cyclones to respond.
Yeah, it was funny with Iowa State because I had them as an 8-star against Arizona the week before they played Cincy. And then I went and backed Cincy, smaller play, but still back Cincy the very next week against the Cyclones. So we've hit those 2 plays in recent weeks with Iowa State games, once on them, once against them. But I like him here. This might end up as a part of my premium plays come Saturday's card. We're going to talk about NFL in just a moment, but I wanted to mention a couple of more college football kind of major moves on Sunday afternoon. UConn playing well on the road at Rice. They opened 9. They are now up to 10.5. The battle in Michigan at East Lansing, Michigan State hosting the Wolverines. Michigan opened 12.5 in this one. That's been bet up to 14 in most books. And now Sharon Moore is, I was talking to some people, some alums from the University of Michigan. They already are talking about, we got to get Sharon Moore out if we want to get back to the top of the mountain in college football. And as far as Michigan State, man, I've seen some write-ups and some rumors about the Spartan faithful already, just throwing rotten eggs and tomatoes at Jonathan Smith, the former Oregon State coach, who I thought was a pretty good hire, and I think he deserves a couple of years there before they start, trying to get this guy out the door. So interesting there. Michigan laying 14. Wake Forest at SMU, or hosting SMU, I should say, in ACC play. Wake Forest went from a 4.5 opening line dog down to 3. SMU, of course, off that big win against the Clemson Tigers this past weekend. And finally, in Iowa City, it's Iowa getting the action on Sunday afternoon for next week. They opened 7. They've been bet up to 9. Minnesota, I'm going to tell folks right now, and we talked about this. I did a free video. I'm a Husker guy. I grew up there. Of course, I've been in Vegas for my entire adult life, but still follow the Huskers. And I was saying on that video on Friday, they want to put Nebraska out there as a road favorite. Give me the points. And I'm not going to give Minnesota a whole lot of credit other than being extremely well coached. This is going to be a tough spot, I think, for the Golden Gophers. And I think that number opened based on what Minnesota did on Friday night. As far as the Hawkeyes, I just got to get something off my chest. That was a top 5 countdown play for me this past week, and I had him, Scott, over at the Westgate. I went into the Westgate weekend with the 4th best record in the 1,500-person college football contest. Iowa was one of those plays, laid the 3, and the Hawkeyes gave up a block punt return for a touchdown on the final play of the first half to Penn State, and then the Hawkeyes went for 2 twice in the second half and came up short both times. That's a whole lot of points left on the field rather than the scoreboard. And yeah, I'm making an excuse here, but once in a while we got to pout about these games. Let's get to the final game that saw some movement, and that, of course, was Arizona State going from a 7-point favorite at home to Houston up to 8.5. Nice win by ASU. They knocked Texas Tech from the unbeaten. Texas Tech didn't have their quarterback in that particular game, but the Sun Devils got the job done. Let's head to the NFL, Scott. We've got San Francisco at the Texans, and this one started moving even before the Sunday night game went final for San Francisco. They opened 2.5 underdog. They're now a 1.5-point underdog. Any thoughts on this one?
This one for me is tough to talk about at length because the Texans, of course, are playing tonight on Monday night as we're, or I should say tomorrow on Monday night as we're making this recording here on Sunday night. But I feel that the short week for Houston is part of the reason for the early line move. But keep in mind the disadvantage of a short week is offset some because they entered week 7 off of a bye week. So without knowing how Houston fares against Seattle, it's a little tough to call. It's a long road trip too. Even Houston so far south and going all the way to the Pacific Northwest, it's a long way to go. But the other thing too about Houston is they've entered that Monday night game off of back-to-back wins by a combined score of 70-10. So even though San Francisco looks strong versus Atlanta and has played a tough schedule lately, the Seattle schedule's been pretty. The Houston schedule's also been pretty tough lately. So for me, this is just a tough call all the way around because of those above factors. Yeah,
I'm going to look into maybe getting into the total a little bit as we move along in this week and kind of see where some of the money comes in, because this is going to be a battle of a couple of decent defenses, and I don't know there's a whole lot of high-powered offensive capabilities from either one of these teams. All right, here's an interesting one because the Bears have been winning. I got to say that again so everybody hears it. The Bears have been winning, and Baltimore's been losing, and it is a home game for the Ravens off the bye week. They were bet from an opening line of 6 up to 7 as a home favorite. It looks like Lamar's going to be ready to go. Some injuries that were suffered on defense in these first few weeks of the season by Baltimore. Some of those are shored up and players are getting healthy. John Harbaugh has a real nice outright record off a bye week. He's actually done really well off of bye weeks outright. And the Bears might be reading their clippings and feeling their oats a little bit. This is a season saver for Baltimore, Scott. They can't lose this game if they want to get back in the playoff race, especially if Lamar is on the field and he's expected to be.
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes teams, they don't want that bye week. It comes at the wrong time. And you always look forward to rest, but if you're rolling, you hate to have a bye week. In Baltimore's case, they needed this perhaps more than any other team in the league. So it was key for them to have that bye week. And even though the Bears have won 4 straight games, the teams that they have beaten currently have a combined 9-18 record. Then you look at Baltimore, they've lost 4 straight, but the teams that they lost to included the Rams and Chiefs and Lions. Those teams are a combined 13-7. So if there was ever a perfect time for the Ravens to step up and be more like the Baltimore teams of recent seasons, this is the week. And at home, coming off a bye week after losing 4 straight, it's put up or shut up time for the Ravens. And I understand this move 100% and agree with it. So.
And guess which team is going to be featured on a whole bunch of teaser cards this weekend that the books are going to be rooting against? That's going to be the Baltimore Ravens on 6 and 7 point teasers, no doubt about it, tied in with other teams. We've got the Cowboys at the Broncos, and the Broncos were crazy on Sunday. No points scored in the first 3 quarters. The Giants all but had the game wrapped up. You guys can go back and watch and see what happened. It'd take us a half hour here to go through it all. Denver finds a way to score 33 fourth quarter points, win the game 33-32 on a last-second field goal after the Giants had just scored a touchdown to go up 32-30. And not only that, they missed the extra point, opening the door for Denver on that final drive to win on a field goal, which they did. And then the Cowboys blasted the Washington Commanders 44-22. So here's the Cowboys. They're opening up a 3.5-point dog. Now they're a 3-point dog. They're getting some action, and we'll see if it continues. But it's gone from 3.5 to 3, Scott.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I agree with this move. They're off of that big divisional win over Washington, but prior to this, the only other 2 wins that the Cowboys have this season were against a Jets team that's now 0-7, and the Giants that you just mentioned, and they're now 2-5. And that game took a miracle last-second 64-yard field goal for Dallas to even force overtime to force the overtime, which they then ended up beating the Giants in OT. So I think Dallas is a little overvalued here, and I know that the Broncos win. They had to rally from being down 26-8. And like you said, they scored all 33 points in that fourth quarter. But they're now 3-0 at home this season. And remember, they also scored 18 points in the fourth quarter when they won at Philly to beat the Eagles earlier this season. And their recent wins over the Jets was only by 2 points, but they had 3 times as much yardage as New York did in that game. So in my mind, Denver laying just 3 at home, that's a bargain for me in this one. So I'll be keeping an eye on this line.
Yeah, that was a tough one for me with Denver because I ended up going 7-3 all premium plays for the weekend. I had a 6-star on Denver on Sunday, which went down to defeat. And it really stunk twice because I don't know about you, Scott. I'm one of those guys, if my team is not going to cover the spread in a close game at the end, I'm rooting for the other team if we have no chance to cover. And so I'm like, all right, Giants go up 32-30. And guess what happens a few seconds later? So it was a double hit. But anyway, we'll take 7-3 and a few units of profit. Just would have been nice to win that big one. Real quickly, I wanted to mention this one here, folks, that the Giants opened 7.5 at Philly coming off that Denver loss. They've been bet down to 7. I wanted to mention it because of that key number of 7 right there. We'll see where that line goes from here on out. But I also wanted to mention I almost threw the Colts game up here hosting Tennessee because Sunday afternoon, folks, in a couple of the big books, they went from 13.5 to 15. But just in the last couple of hours before this show, it came right back down to 14. So it's been kind of bouncing around. So if you see kind of a line that looks like Indy's getting hit early, they have started coming back the other way once it got up above 14.5 at a couple of books. Early value best bet, Scott, why don't you kick things off for us for this week's card?
Yeah, and I'm going to look at the Ravens. We talked about the move from 6 up to 7, and there is some 7 out there, but there's also quite a bit of 6.5. And so for me, an early line value is if you can get that 6.5, I'd be looking at that because I really do like Baltimore in this spot. I mean, they're saying that Lamar Jackson's going to be back on the field this week, which of course is something to watch. But if you're going to jump on something early, I think that Baltimore, for all the reasons I discussed in when we were talking about the game, this is a great spot for them. And like you said, the Bears feeling a little bit too good about themselves probably here now. And so I think this is a great spot for Baltimore to roll at home.
Let's let everybody know we don't talk to each other about our best bets before we shoot this show. This will be the first time that we've both been on the same side for a best bet. I don't think we've been against each other on a best bet so far this season. So this is the first time that we're talking about a same game in common. I am on Baltimore for this week's early value best bet. Minus the points here. I agree with that movement. Scott's right. At least 70% of the books have 6.5. I would probably recommend getting that quickly if you like the game because the juice is coming in pretty big on Baltimore at this point on Sunday night, but there are still a lot of 6.5s out there. And if you like the Bears, either grab the 7. If you don't have access, wait around because I think it'll be 7 for a lot of people probably by Tuesday. Again, for everything that Scott said, I completely agree with what he said. And I mentioned earlier, John Harbaugh, he's got a real nice record in all his time at Baltimore, coming off a bye week. And in those games, which are a ton of them, they're outscoring their opponents by an average margin of a little over 10 points per game. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't kind of knock the Bears around in this one a little bit and cover that spread by, maybe end up winning the game by 14-17 outright. Cover that spread by about a touchdown to 10 points. So that is both of our best bet for this week's card, the Baltimore Ravens minus the points. Again, don't forget about that code if you want to get 20% off our packages. You can see it right there. And forgive me for my boneheaded mistake on Mississippi State typing them in as I'm thinking about. I even had notes talking about Lane Kiffin, and as far as I know, he hasn't moved to Starkville in the last 24 hours. So anyway, Scott, good stuff. Let's hit it with Baltimore, everybody. Let's watch all those videos all week long. Click on the thumbs up if you like the videos. Be sure to subscribe. We certainly do appreciate it over at Doc Sports. And when you do that, you'll never miss anybody's comp plays all week long. And boy, do we got a bunch of them. For Scott Rickenbach, I'm Scott Spreitzer. We are DocSports.com's Scott and Scott. We'll talk to you again next week, everybody. Thanks for watching.